Tonight on Nation, dealing with suicide's aftermath.
And you agree that, especially in the light of the current crisis of suicides, that a facility is recognized and that you are supportive of this endeavor?
The chief of Ronge Indian Band talks healing and solutions. Oil versus water. Chiefs at the Assembly of First Nations grapple with pipelines.
Above all, I don't want the industry to come between us, like they've been doing recently.
This is Nation. I'm Jorge Barrera. Ronge Indian Band Chief Tammy Cook-Searson faced a state of crisis in October after 4 youth committed suicide. Cook-Searson is now not only working on healing the wounds and the pain, but also to ensure it doesn't happen again. Chief Cook-Searson, thank you so much for joining us. Your communities just went through a serious crisis. 4 youth committed suicide. I'm just wondering how your community is coping today and how you're, as a leader, how you're dealing with a crisis like this that I'm sure continues on.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you, Jorge, for the opportunity to speak today. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the families that are grieving right now in our communities, and we've been supporting them, and they've been supporting each other, and the community has really come together, and I really appreciate all the people that are working hard 24/7 and just doing all the different works and all the different work that they're doing in the community, the planning, the organizing, both for the immediate needs and also all the different departments within the band and then the province and the federal government.
When Indigenous Affairs Minister Carolyn Bennett was here to speak with the Assembly, you asked her a question of concern about a project that your community is hoping to create to deal with this exact issue. Can you tell us a little bit about what you asked her and what's at stake?
Well, maybe I'll just explain a bit about the project, what we've been working on. So we've been working on a wellness healing recovery center in Ronge, and we've been talking about this concept since 2006. So it's been 10 years in the making that we've been talking about this. And we commissioned Dr. Margaret Cress-White to do a feasibility study. So she did a mental health feasibility study to look at the mental health in the north, and then also she took in all the secondary reports that have been done over the last 10 years, and then taking that all that information and then putting it into a report. Then we also involved and engaged, because Ronge Indian Band is 6 separate communities, and then we also are neighbors with the town of Ronge and the village of Ronge, and then in Stanley Mission there's the northern municipality of Stanley Mission. So we engaged, and it was open. We had community meetings and they were open, and then we also did online surveys and then one-on-one interviews that Dr. Cress-White did, and so there was over 300 people that were interviewed. And then we also we had a 30-member mental health advisory council, and then we went to different facilities in Saskatchewan looking at different treatment centers and models, and then this is one of the things that we came up with is, we definitely do need a mental health treatment center in the north.
And the minister, and you've raised this project with the minister, and what has been your concern about the minister's response to?
But when we presented the business plan, because we have the business plan right now and it's almost like probably 90% complete, but we didn't leave the business plan with the minister when we met with her on Monday night, but it was just the tone of the meeting that caused us a bit of concern, maybe that a facility like this wasn't the priority, and more a priority and emphasis was being put on, and we don't disagree, but it is more prevention work, but we also want to make sure that we have facilities to do the prevention work. So we just wanted to recommit, we want a recommitment that the ministry is in support of our mental health treatment center, because right now we don't have a facility.
Your community is faced a crisis, is still dealing with a crisis. You come to a meeting like this, there's a lot of talk of processes and new engagements and these joint things between the feds and the AFN. And do you feel that the leadership of the AFN is reflecting the actual crisis and like immediate needs? on the ground, or do you think there's a, like, how do you feel about it? Is there a disconnect, or do you feel that they are responding to the...
I think from the different of course you always have side meetings when you come here, and there's always it seems that I know that we have a youth crisis in our community, but it's not only a First Nations crisis. It can happen to anybody, anywhere. It doesn't matter what your income, what background you come from, and it's just looking at how do we give hope to people? How do we instill a reason to live, a reason to go on, and what is it that's making people lose hope? What is it? And we don't have the answers, but we want to be able to provide a place where we can give hope to people, because we don't want people we know that depression is a huge issue. To be told that it wasn't really a priority to build a facility, it was almost like I wasn't sure what to say or how to go about it, and I thought, well, maybe we just need to rewrite our plan a little bit and make it more clear, and then take it back to the people and take it back to our advisory council one more time, just to ask them exactly, is this what you really, is this, this is what they want, but we also have to, we need that clear direction. Once we get that clear direction from our advisory council, then we'll be able to push it forward, keep pushing it, like we're pushing it right now, but we can't give up on it either, because even if it gets tough, and if it gets challenging, and if we meet up with obstacles, we just have to keep pushing it, because it's something good for the community, and sometimes even when you're doing something good, there's always setbacks, but you just have to keep pushing forward.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing about this project with us, and we'll be watching how the federal government reacts to it as you keep pushing forward.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your support.
Coming up after the break, debating pipelines. Kanesatake Grand Chief Serge Simon and Dean Manywounds, Chairman of the Indian Resource Council, join us to discuss both sides of the issue. This is NationToNation. I'm Jorge Barrera. Kanesatake Grand Chief Serge Simon leads a community that once held the world's attention during the Oka crisis. Now, the Mohawk chief has emerged as one of the leading voices for the Treaty Alliance against tar sands expansion. Dean Manywounds is the chairman of the Indian Resource Council, an organization that represents the interests of oil-producing First Nations that support pipelines and the expansion of Alberta's bitumen fields. Joining me now is Dean Manywounds, the chairman of the Indian Resource Council, and Kanesatake Grand Chief Serge Simon. Thanks for joining us to discuss this real, important and perceived to be polarizing issue. Grand Chief Simon, you spoke during this week at a panel here at the AFN about this issue, and you talked about finding a common ground. You represent, you're a lead spokesperson for a Indigenous Treaty Alliance against, quote, tar sands expansion. I'm just wondering, what sort of common ground can you find with First Nations that are actually in Alberta producing oil and benefiting from it?
Well, some of the common ground, I think Mr. Mucha would agree, is the existing infrastructure that's in the ground right now, okay, is aged. It needs to be changed. There's also health studies, water monitoring, and so on. If his band is having trouble with the industry, the Treaty Alliance can help. We're just saying, just don't expand. You're already exploiting what's there. Stop the expansion. And what's already there, make sure that the First Nations that are benefiting from this, that they benefit equally. I mean, they get a real share, not just the nickels and dimes that they often get from industry. So it's empowering this First Nation to benefit in a much safer way, and I think later on to get a bigger share, I think, of what they're owed. Later on, we can also help push and open markets up for this First Nation to go ahead and make more money somewhere else, under something else. They're transitioning from oil to something else. We're going to need everyone on board. All minds must be focused on this. For the moment, yes, we can't deny that there's a need and they are benefiting, but they have to be careful because the market forces are going to push oil right out. It might be in 2 years, 5 years, I don't know. But you need to prepare for that.
Okay. Now, just because you referred to his First Nation, we're talking about Tsuut'ina Nation. You were a counselor. Yeah, you were a counselor there as well. But right now you're the chairman of this Indian Resource Council that represents, First Nations that produce oil and gas. Number one, he said nickel and dimes from the industry. Is that the case? And is it possible not to expand when you're involved in this industry?
Well, to the first point, I think all of us as First Nations know we've been nickeled and dimed for a long time. That's our story. We've watched the industrial growth of society, and we've gotten the nickels and dimes. And that table has turned by court decisions rendered in our favor over the last decade. And that has given us a strength and a power that can actually, tell industry and tell our treaty partner in Canada that, those types of approaches to us being involved, that's archaic. That's early 20th century. We're in the 21st century.
Yeah.
We are learning more things. I'm a road builder by trade. I've been in energy for a long time. And I like those industries for one thing is that they cover a broad range of vocations. Legal, accounting, business. They cover everything, as well as the business of whatever it is. Environmental, which I'm an environmental technologist. And so with all of that broad spectrum, we are able to teach our young people what it is to participate at that table properly and ensure that our security is there economically. Because our economic sovereignty, and I know my Mohawk brother is of the same ilk that we've been taught. Our treaties are our economic sovereignty, our strength of that. We were like that for thousands of generations. My grandfather always said that's what we need to get back to. So we have many producing First Nations who would benefit, of course, from the pipes. But there's new technologies that are coming, including for potential expansion, so that the boreal forest doesn't get bothered. Conventional ways and unconventional ways, there are approaches to be done. But again, there's a price to it. So you get industry that says, well, the regulation says we only need to go here. And the price to do what you think is up here. Well, I think all of us across the country with any industry, when it comes to the environment, there's not really a cost. Let's do what's the best practice. That's what we want done.
Okay, so let's stay on that point. So he's saying there is technology that can make extraction greener. Is that something that you're open to? Do you think you can be convinced that it's possible to expand, the bitumen fields of Alberta in a green way that would satisfy your concerns about climate change?
I don't know about that. The fact is I don't think they can reduce the amount of water needed to extract the tar sands, or reduce the amount of natural gas being diverted to it, and even the electricity that's going to be used. You're diverting 3 major resources to extract one. And when you look at it, the oil is still going to flow. The existing infrastructure, if you have that technology, use it to fix the one that's already there. Don't talk to me about a new one going through either Vancouver or going through my territory. We're not going to accept it. We're going to fight it tooth and nail. But we are going to fight tooth and nail for the First Nation that's benefiting, like my brother's community, to make sure that they're treated fairly. Because there's no division like people were trying to make it look like. Like we said, we're going to help. We're there for First Nations first and foremost. And that's what we're going to continue promoting. The next step might be an economic treaty instead of one against the expansion of the tar sands. Where we could share our markets amongst each other and do it in a very respectful way.
The First Nations that are involved in oil and gas, Do you think they're locked into that industry, and is it possible for them to pivot off of that, or is basically all in on this and the economic future? I mean, we heard that Fort McKay only depends on 4% of its total budget that comes from the government. You know, most of its money comes from oil and gas. Is it, are they locked into this? Is this an issue where perhaps the Treaty Alliance threatens the economic viability of some of these First Nations?
Well, I think like Alberta's learning. I think like Canada's learning. And, we are sovereign communities, and we need to learn that a diversified economy is your success. Mm-hmm. And you need to use the capital of whatever may be a major economic push at the time to utilize that to diversify yourself in other areas. And again, like I say, that's a lesson we're watching on the non-native side. Mm-hmm. And we need to learn from those things. And we need to know that we need to use our capabilities, as the chief had said, to diversify in other areas. The aging infrastructure is exactly our concern. Is how do we, upgrade the aging infrastructure that is there exactly for the protection of his territory. Sure, it starts out west, but there is existing infrastructure that needs upgrading. And we have pushed that in many downtown Calgary conversations, is that, there is stuff there that we need to, have better work, replace, how polymer technologies are getting better, much, much better. So there is science and technologies that can actually need to help with what's there. There's dilutions and diluents that are being created that actually can take the bitumen more, not being such a rough oil, but bring it down where it's easier on the line, and it's not breaking the integrity of the pipe. And again, these cost dollars, they're above a regulatory requirement, and industry always tells me, well, but we're going the ceiling of the regulatory. Those days are over. That conversation is done. It's done. If something exists that costs you more money, that's the price of doing business with us. And that's the price of having our interests and our right to practice our traditional way of life. That's the cost of that. Those are our rights given to us by our ancestors. Practice traditional way of life. Mm-hmm. And if you got no fish to fish, you got no moose to hunt, those traditional practices are going to get lost. So it's a balance. I've heard so many leaders talk about this balance. And I was taught that from my grandparents, that balance that we're finding.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, you want to, just one quick word?
Yeah, one thing, as we do this whole alliance, and we start promoting a greener technology, we also have to start looking at making sure that the free, prior, informed consent that we've been looking for a long time is respected. Now, existing infrastructure right now might be passing through like some of the Algonquin lands back home, and they're looking for the government to respect their rights to free, prior, informed consent when they want to do any kind of upgrades or anything of that sort. So there's always that aspect as well. We've always had this, like you said, our sovereignty. Now we have Canada saying you don't have it. We're going to go through whether you like it or not. And the industry is pushing very hard against those rights. We have to fight against that too.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that's all the time we have, and thank you so much for joining us to discuss this important issue, and we're going to keep watching it, and we want to make sure all voices are heard on this, so thank you so much for contributing to that.
Thanks a lot, very much. Thank you.
When we return, if not oil, then what? We speak to someone who has some ideas. This is NationToNation. I'm Jorge Barrera. So if not oil, what's the alternative? Chris Henderson is one of the country's top advisors to Indigenous communities on green energy. He advises First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities on sparking economic development through emerging alternative energy sources. Joining me now is Chris Henderson. He's the president of Loomis Clean Energy and also the author of a book called Aboriginal Power. Thank you so much for joining us. You had an interesting presentation this week during the AFN Winter Chiefs Assembly here about the potential of clean energy. You rhymed off some interesting stats about how many First Nations are involved and how many projects are actually completed. Can you tell us a little bit about what these stats are and what?
Sure, I'd be pleased to. So as we sit here today, there are about 100 clean energy projects, wind, hydro, and solar projects, biomass projects operating across the country that are owned in part or 100% by First Nations. And that's in almost every province and territory. That story's been written for the last 5 to 10 years, and it's a great Aboriginal success story.
And you also mentioned the level of own source revenue that these clean energy projects are producing. What are we talking about? How big is the own source potential here?
It's in the range of $100 to $200 million a year that communities are already earning from their co-ownership of clean energy projects. And it's growing as more projects come online. So in total of that 100 projects, there are about 200 First Nations that are partners in those projects. That's about 1/3 of First Nations across the country.
And you said it's probably right now the third highest source of own source revenue?
Yeah.
Next behind?
I'd say property ownership and leases would be the first, and then either involvement in the mining or the forestry sector would be 2 and 3, and the oil and gas sector, and then clean energy is going to come in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th level. We're doing some numbers to figure out exactly where it sits.
But is there money out there that First Nations can access in terms of investment to actually get this stuff off the ground, or do we need more government policy tailored to developing this type of energy?
Well, the answer is yes to both. I mean, you definitely need policy at the provincial and territorial level that allows First Nations to participate in those projects. Ontario's been a leader, and other provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan are now coming on board. So you need the right policy. In terms of financing, the good news about clean energy, largely when those projects go ahead with partners, they're mostly financed with long-term debt. So $100 million projects, you mainly only need about 10% to own the equity of the project. That's $10 million. So for $2.5 million, a community can own 25% of a $100 million project. That's a really effective way to get into the market.
So when we talk about clean energy projects, what are we talking about? What kind of projects are they?
Sure. The first would be, the most popular would be responsible hydro. Hydro that does not affect fishery, does not affect the environment. So the majority of projects are going to be hydro projects, small and large. The second biggest will be solar projects. These are solar projects that could be covering the size of a football field or as many as 10 or 20 football fields. And the third will be wind projects that may be a few turbines on towers or as many as 40 or 50. So those are the three main sources of renewable energy.
One of the biggest critiques, and just to wrap, one of the biggest critiques against clean energy has been renewable energy can't meet the needs of sort of high demand, sort of the load that's existing energy, like right now that's being produced, like nuclear can produce, for example. Is that true? Is that a myth, or can renewable energy actually meet the load demands?
In part it's true, but if you look at hydro, 60% of the electricity in this country is generated from hydropower. Hydropower, when you have a dam and you have a reservoir behind it, is as effective as nuclear in terms of dispatchable power. Wind and solar are a bit more variable, so you typically want to blend wind and solar with things like hydropower and natural gas. That's the kind of clean energy solution that we can work with.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this fascinating new realm in possible First Nations economic development.
It's a great clean energy future, especially for the generations to come.
Okay, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Well, that's all the time we have for Nation to Nation. We'll leave you now with Autumn Pelche's Water Song, which enchanted the AFN Assembly. I'm Jorge Barrera. Thanks for joining us. Good night.